The transport ship Horizon's Edge drifted silently through the void toward the massive structure ahead. Ben Richards pressed his face against the small porthole, watching as the Valdorian Empire's flagship grew larger with each passing minute. The vessel was unlike anything humanity had ever built. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, its surface covered in organic curves that pulsed with soft blue light. "First time seeing a bioship?" asked Captain Torres, the grizzled veteran who had volunteered to pilot Ben to this crucial meeting. "First time seeing anything this big," Ben replied, adjusting the collar of his formal diplomatic uniform. The dark blue fabric felt strange after months of wearing his old military gear. "Makes our biggest cruisers look like shuttles," Torres chuckled. "Wait until you see the inside. These Valdorians don't build anything small." Ben nodded, though his mind was focused on the task ahead. Earth had been trying to join the Galactic Defense Alliance for 2 years now. Every application had been rejected. Every diplomatic mission had failed. The other species saw humans as primitives barely worthy of notice. But the Devourer threat was growing stronger, and Earth needed allies. This meeting with Princess Zara was humanity's last chance. The docking process took nearly an hour. Ben watched through the porthole as massive organic tendrils reached out from the Valdorian ship, gently grasping their small transport, and drawing it into a docking bay that looked more like the inside of a living creature than a mechanical structure. "Remember," Torres said as they prepared to disembark, "these beings judge everything by strength and military power. Don't let them intimidate you." Ben picked up his helmet and sealed his environmental suit. The Valdorian atmosphere was breathable for humans, but protocol demanded full protection. "I'll do my best, Captain." The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Ben stepped into a corridor that curved upward like the inside of a massive tube. The walls pulsed with the same blue light he had seen from outside, and he could feel a slight vibration through his boots, as if the ship itself was breathing. A tall figure approached from the shadows ahead. As it came into the light, Ben saw his first Valdorian up close. The being stood nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms ending in delicate hands that moved with fluid grace. Its skin was a pale purple color, and its elongated head held large violet eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. "I am Commander Vex," the being said, its voice producing sounds that Ben's translator converted into accented English. "I will escort you to the throne chamber." Ben inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you, Commander. I am Ambassador Ben Richards, representing Earth and the Human Coalition." Commander Vex studied him for a long moment, its large eyes taking in every detail of Ben's appearance. "You are smaller than I expected," it said finally, "and you appear to have no natural weapons or defensive features. Humans evolved differently than most species," Ben replied diplomatically. "We rely on tools and cooperation rather than physical advantages." "Interesting," Vex said, though its tone suggested it found humans more curious than impressive. "Follow me. Princess Zara is waiting." They walked through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, passing chambers filled with beings from dozens of different species. Ben recognized some from the intelligence briefings he had studied. The massive Gornathi looked like living mountains, their rocky skin gleaming under the bioluminescent lighting. The ethereal Silthari seemed to fade in and out of visibility as they moved, their forms shifting like smoke. Towering Kythons stood guard at various intersections, their insect-like bodies covered in natural armor that could deflect most energy weapons. Each species Ben encountered seemed designed for war. Natural weapons, thick armor, psychic abilities, or technological implants that enhanced their combat effectiveness. Humanity had none of these advantages. "The princess will likely test you," Commander Vex said as they approached a massive set of doors that reached from floor to ceiling. "She tests all potential allies to determine their worth to the Alliance." "What kind of test?" Ben asked. Vex's mandibles clicked, and what Ben's briefings had taught him was a Valdorian expression of amusement. "You will discover that soon enough." The doors began to open, revealing a chamber so vast that Ben could barely see the far walls. The ceiling stretched upward into darkness, supported by pillars that looked like enormous trees made of crystal. Bioluminescent patterns flowed across every surface, creating a constantly shifting display of blues and purples that was both beautiful and disorienting. At the center of the chamber, on a raised platform that seemed to grow from the floor itself, sat Princess Zara. Ben had seen images of Valdorian royalty in his briefings, But seeing Princess Zara in person was something entirely different. She was larger than Commander Vex, her forearms adorned with intricate jewelry that pulsed with its own light. Her skin was a deeper purple than the commander's, and intricate patterns had been carved into her elongated skull, marking her royal status. But it was her eyes that caught Ben's attention. They held an intelligence that was both ancient and utterly alien. Arranged around the chamber were representatives from every major species in the Alliance. Ben counted at least 12 different races, all watching him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright contempt. "Approach," Princess Zara commanded, her voice echoing through the vast space. Ben walked forward, his footsteps seeming impossibly loud in the sudden silence. He stopped at the base of the platform and looked up at the princess, waiting for her to speak first as protocol demanded. Princess Zara studied him for a long moment, her violet eyes moving from his helmet to his boots and back again. "So," she said finally, "this is what Earth sends to request membership in the greatest military alliance this galaxy has ever known." Ben remained silent, sensing that any response would be premature. "Remove your helmet," the princess commanded. "I wish to see the face of the creature that believes its species worthy of standing beside us." Ben reached up and disengaged the seals on his helmet, lifting it off and clipping it to his belt. The air in the chamber was warm and humid, carrying scents that his translator could not identify. Princess Zara leaned forward on her platform, her 4 hands gripping the edges of her throne. "Fascinating," she said, and Ben could hear mockery in her tone. "No natural armor, no visible weapons, no psychic emanations that I can detect." She gestured toward the assembled representatives. "Tell me, human, what do you see when you look around this chamber?" Ben looked slowly around the room, taking in the various species. "I see the representatives of proud civilizations that have chosen to stand together against a common threat." "Indeed," the princess said, rising from her throne. "But what you should see are the most powerful military forces in known space. The Gornathi, whose rock-hard skin can withstand direct hits from plasma cannons. The Kithans, whose natural weapons can cut through starship hulls. The Silthari, who can phase through solid matter and strike from dimensions your primitive science cannot even detect." She began to pace across her platform, her movements fluid and predatory. "Each species here has proven their worth through combat prowess, technological superiority, or psychic abilities that border on the miraculous. Each has something unique to offer in our war against the Devourers." Ben listened silently, knowing that interrupting would be both rude and potentially dangerous. "But humans," Princess Zara continued, her voice taking on a tone of obvious contempt. "What do humans offer? Your ships are slow compared to ours. Your weapons are primitive by our standards. Your technology is centuries behind most of the species in this room. Your lifespans are so brief that you barely have time to learn anything before you die." She stopped pacing and fixed her violet eyes directly on Ben. "Your species has never faced a truly advanced enemy. You have never encountered beings that can devour entire worlds. You know nothing of the kind of warfare we wage among the stars." Ben felt the weight of every gaze in the chamber upon him. He could sense the curiosity of some representatives, the hostility of others, and the general atmosphere of skepticism that filled the vast space. "I have studied your military history," Princess Zara continued. "Humans fight each other constantly. You wage wars over resources, territory, ideology, even religious beliefs. You cannot even achieve peace among your own species. Yet you believe you are ready to stand beside us against an enemy that has consumed 14 worlds in the past 3 years." The princess descended from her platform, moving with the fluid grace of a natural predator. As she approached, Ben could see that she was even larger than he had realized. Standing at her full height, she towered over him by more than a meter. "Furthermore," she said, circling around him like a hunter studying prey, "humans appear to be physically weak. You have no natural weapons, no defensive adaptations, no enhanced senses. From what I understand, most of your technology is designed to compensate for your biological limitations." A sound like crystal breaking echoed through the chamber. Ben realized it was Valdorian laughter, and it was coming from several of the assembled representatives. "Tell me, little human," Princess Zara said, stopping directly in front of him, "what could your primitive species possibly contribute to our alliance? What do you have that we need?" Ben met her gaze steadily, his hands clasped behind his back in a formal military stance. Your Highness, I did not come here to boast about our weapons or our technology. No? The princess's mandibles clicked in amusement. Then what did you come here to do? I came to offer you something that might be more valuable than either weapons or technology. The laughter in the chamber died away, replaced by curious silence. Princess Zara tilted her elongated head, studying Ben with new interest. And what might that be? Our willingness to stand when others fall. The silence that followed was absolute. Ben could hear only the soft humming of the chamber's bioluminescent systems and the distant vibration of the ship's massive engines. Princess Zara stared at him for several heartbeats, then threw back her head and released the most intense burst of crystal-breaking laughter Ben had heard yet. The sound echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the walls and ceiling until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Stand when others fall? She gasped between bursts of laughter. Human, do you have any comprehension of what you are saying? The Devourers have been advancing through this sector for 3 standard cycles. They have consumed 14 worlds, absorbed the military might of 6 different species, and show no signs of slowing down. Her laughter gradually subsided, replaced by a cold smile that sent chills down Ben's spine. Each world they consume makes them stronger. Each species they absorb adds new capabilities to their collective. They learn from every battle, adapt to every strategy, and counter every weapon we develop. She began pacing again, her forearms gesturing as she spoke. The Devourers do not negotiate. They do not retreat. They do not show mercy. They simply consume everything in their path, adding the biological and technological distinctiveness of each species to their own. Princess Zara stopped and looked directly at Ben. Your backward little planet would be nothing more than an appetizer to them. They would consume your entire species in a matter of days, add your primitive technologies to their collective, and move on without a second thought. Ben nodded slowly, his expression remaining calm despite the hostility radiating from the princess. Perhaps you're right, Your Highness. Earth might fall quickly to such an enemy, but I've noticed something interesting about every species that has fallen to the Devourers. Oh? Princess Zara's voice dripped with sarcasm. And what wisdom does the primitive human wish to share with beings who have been fighting this war, since before your species developed spaceflight? Ben looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of various representatives before returning his gaze to the princess. Every species that has fallen to the Devourers made the same choice when the battle turned against them. Which was? They retreated when the odds became unfavorable. They calculated their losses, weighed their chances of victory, and made the logical decision to withdraw and fight another day. Princess Zara's eyes narrowed. Logical decisions are what separate civilized species from primitive ones, human. Only a fool fights a battle they cannot win. You're probably right, Ben said calmly. Retreating when faced with overwhelming odds is the smart thing to do. It's the logical thing to do. It's what any rational military commander would do. He paused, letting his words hang in the air before continuing. But humans have never been particularly logical when it comes to protecting what we care about. The princess stared at him for a long moment, her violet eyes searching his face for some sign of weakness or deception. You speak as if this is somehow an advantage. Maybe it is, Ben replied. Maybe that's exactly what this alliance needs right now. Not another species that will calculate the odds and withdraw when things get difficult. Maybe you need a species that's too stubborn to know when they should quit. Stubborn, Princess Zara repeated, her voice flat. You believe that stubbornness will somehow overcome an enemy that has defeated some of the most advanced military forces in the galaxy? I believe that sometimes the battle isn't won by the smartest or the strongest, Ben said. Sometimes it's won by whoever is still standing when the smoke clears. The princess's 4 hands clenched into fists. You speak of things you do not understand, human. You have never faced the Devourers. You have never seen an entire world consumed, its population absorbed into a collective consciousness that grows stronger with each victory. You have never watched a fleet of starships disappear into a writhing mass of organic technology that turns your own weapons against you. You're right, Ben admitted. Humanity has never faced anything like the Devourers, but we've faced other impossible odds before, such as? Ben thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. There have been times in our history when small groups of humans have held positions against overwhelming enemy forces. Not because they thought they could win, but because someone needed to buy time for others to escape. Times when humans have charged into certain death, because the alternative was watching innocent people suffer. Princess Zara's expression shifted slightly, curiosity replacing some of the contempt. And you believe this tendency toward self-sacrifice somehow qualifies your species for membership in our alliance? I believe it might be exactly what your alliance is missing, Ben said. From what I've observed, every species here is logical, intelligent, and strategically minded. Those are all valuable qualities. But sometimes you need someone who will hold the line even when retreat is the smart option. The princess opened her mouth to respond, but her words were cut off by a deep rumbling sound that seemed to come from the ship itself. Every being in the chamber immediately stopped what they were doing and turned toward the massive doors at the far end of the room. The doors began to open, but this time they moved slowly, accompanied by a ceremonial tone that Ben felt more than heard. A collective gasp arose from the assembled representatives, and Ben watched in amazement as every single being in the chamber, including Princess Zara, immediately dropped to their knees. Every being except Ben, who remained standing in confusion, unsure of what was happening. Through the opening doors came a figure that made Princess Zara look small by comparison. Queen Kayla moved with the fluid grace of something that had never known fear, her 6 limbs carrying her massive frame across the polished floor. Her ancient eyes, which seemed to hold the wisdom of ages, swept across the prostrated assembly before fixing directly on the lone human figure who remained standing. Ben felt the weight of that gaze and knew that everything was about to change. Ben stood frozen as the massive figure of Queen Kayla entered the chamber. He had studied every available image of the Valdorian monarch during his preparation for this mission, but seeing her in person was something entirely different. The queen moved like a force of nature, each step causing the bioluminescent patterns in the floor to pulse brighter beneath her feet. Her scarred hide told the story of countless battles fought across decades of warfare. Deep grooves marked where energy weapons had failed to penetrate her natural armor. Patches of darker skin showed where bioacids had been neutralized by her body's defenses. Most striking of all was the bioluminescent crown that had grown from her skull over centuries of rule, its pulsing light marking her as the absolute authority of the Valdorian Empire. Ben quickly assessed the situation. Every being in the chamber remained kneeling, their heads bowed in respect. Protocol demanded that he show similar deference to the queen, but something in her ancient eyes told him to remain exactly as he was. Queen Kayla approached slowly, her 6 limbs carrying her with predatory grace across the polished floor. As she drew closer, Ben could see details that the intelligence reports had never captured. Her eyes held depths that spoke of wisdom gained through unimaginable loss. Scars covered not just her hide but her very soul. "Mother," Princess Zara began, her voice trembling with uncertainty as she remained kneeling. "This human ambassador was explaining their species' supposed value to our alliance. I was just demonstrating why such primitive beings have no place among civilized military forces." The queen stopped directly in front of Ben, towering over him by nearly 3 meters. For a long moment she studied his face with those ancient eyes, as if reading something written in a language only she could understand. "I know exactly who this is," Queen Kayla said quietly, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber despite its soft tone. Ben felt his heart skip a beat. He had hoped his identity would remain unknown, that he could represent humanity without the complications of his personal history. "Your Majesty," he said, inclining his head respectfully. "You were at Kepler Station," the Queen continued, her statement hanging in the air like a physical presence. The chamber remained silent except for the soft humming of bioluminescent systems. Ben could feel every gaze in the room focused on him, though he kept his eyes fixed on the Queen's face. "Yes, Your Majesty." Princess Zara raised her head, confusion clear in her violet eyes. "Mother, I do not understand. Kepler Station fell to the Devourers during the last major offensive. There were no survivors reported." Queen Kayla's massive head turned toward her daughter, and Ben saw something that might have been sadness flicker across her features. "There was one survivor, my daughter. This human." Ben felt the weight of memory pressing down on him. Kepler Station had been his worst nightmare and his greatest failure, all wrapped into one horrible experience. He had hoped never to speak of it again. "I still do not understand," Princess Zara said, rising slightly from her kneeling position. "What significance could one human survivor have?" The Queen turned back to Ben, her ancient eyes holding his gaze. "Tell them," she said simply. Ben shook his head slightly. "Your Majesty, I prefer not to—" "Tell them," the Queen repeated, her voice carrying the weight of absolute command. Ben took a deep breath, gathering himself for a story he had tried to forget. But before he could speak, Queen Kayla began to tell it herself. Kepler Station was a refugee processing center, she began, her voice taking on the tone of someone recounting ancient history. It housed beings displaced by the Devourer advance, families who had lost their worlds, children who had watched their parents consumed by the enemy, over 4 million souls from dozens of species, all seeking safety behind our defensive lines. The Queen began to pace slowly around Ben, her movements fluid and purposeful. The station was protected by a mixed fleet of Alliance vessels, Gornathi heavy cruisers, Kithan fast attack ships, Silthari stealth vessels, Valdorian bioships like this one, and one small human frigate that should not have been there at all. Princess Zara looked confused. Why should the human ship not have been there? Because, the Queen continued, humans were not yet members of the Alliance. Earth had been petitioning for membership for months, but their application had been rejected repeatedly. The human ship was there unofficially, operating under emergency refugee protocols. Ben remembered the Defiant, his ship, arriving at Kepler Station after a desperate flight from Earth. They had been carrying refugees of their own, humans who had been caught in outer colonies when the Devourer advance began. Captain Morrison had insisted they help with the evacuation efforts, despite having no official authority to do so. The Devourers arrived without warning, Queen Kayla continued. Their bioships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, already adapted to counter our standard defensive patterns. It was clear they had been studying our tactics, learning from previous encounters. Ben closed his eyes, remembering the moment when the massive organic vessels had appeared on the scanner, dark writhing things that seemed to absorb light itself. The Devourers did not build ships in any conventional sense. They grew them, creating living vessels that could adapt and evolve during combat. The battle was fierce, the Queen said, her voice growing softer with respect for the fallen. Our forces fought bravely, but the Devourers had prepared well. They had developed countermeasures for every weapon we deployed, adaptations for every strategy we attempted. One by one, our ships began to fall. Princess Zara and the other representatives listened in rapt attention. Many of them had heard about the battle at Kepler Station, but few knew the full details. When it became clear that the defense would fail, Queen Kayla continued, Station Commander Thylax ordered immediate evacuation. But there was a problem. The evacuation ships could only carry half the station's population in a single run. Someone would have to stay behind and hold the docking bays long enough for the ships to reach minimum safe distance. Ben opened his eyes and found the Queen looking directly at him. Every species represented at that station did the logical thing, she said. They prioritized their own people for evacuation. Gornathi civilians boarded Gornathi ships. Kythan families went with Kythan escorts. Silthari children were loaded onto Silthari vessels. It was reasonable. It was sensible. It was exactly what any military commander would order. The Queen stopped pacing and stood directly in front of Ben again. Every species except one, she said quietly. The humans. Princess Zara leaned forward, her forearms gripping the edge of her platform. What did the humans do differently? Captain Morrison and his crew of 47 humans volunteered to stay behind, Queen Kayla said, her voice filled with something that sounded like reverence. Not to save their own people, but to save everyone else's children. The chamber fell silent except for the soft breathing of various species and the distant hum of the ship's biosystems. The human ship had already loaded its own refugees, the Queen continued. They could have departed with the first wave of evacuation vessels. They could have ensured the safety of their own people and left with honor intact. Instead, they transferred their human refugees to other ships and volunteered to remain at the station. Ben felt his throat tighten as the memories came flooding back. He remembered Captain Morrison's face when he had made the announcement to the crew. The old man had looked tired but determined. Someone has to hold the docking bays, he had said. Might as well be us. For 6 hours, Queen Kayla said, her voice growing stronger. 48 humans held 17 docking bays against a devourer assault that should have overwhelmed them in minutes. They knew they were going to die. They knew no rescue was coming. They knew their own ship was too small and too weak to make any meaningful difference against the enemy fleet. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing, but they stayed anyway. Ben remembered those 6 hours as the longest of his life. The Devourers had sent wave after wave of bio-soldiers into the station. Creatures that had once been members of consumed species, now twisted into weapons of organic technology. The human crew had fought with everything they had, using the station's defensive systems to hold corridor after corridor. They used every weapon available, the Queen continued. Station defense turrets, portable plasma cannons, emergency bulkhead systems. When their energy weapons ran out of power, they used kinetic weapons. When those ran out of ammunition, they used maintenance tools and improvised explosives. Princess Zara stared at Ben with new eyes, seeing him perhaps for the first time as something other than a primitive curiosity. The humans held long enough for every evacuation ship to clear the station and reach minimum safe distance, Queen Kayla said. 3,700,000 beings owe their lives to what those 48 humans did that day. Ben felt tears threatening behind his eyes. He had tried so hard to forget the faces of his crewmates. Rodriguez, who had held the main corridor until a bio-soldier's acid ate through his armor. Chen, who had manually activated the emergency bulkheads even as the station systems failed around her. Captain Morrison, who had stayed at his post until the very end, making sure every last refugee ship escaped before giving the final order. When the last evacuation vessel cleared the station, the Queen continued, Captain Morrison activated the manual override for the reactor core. The explosion destroyed Kepler Station, the entire Devourer boarding force, and 2 of their smaller bioships. She turned to look, directly at Princess Zara, but the explosion also bought the refugee fleet enough time to reach our patrol. Ships and escape to safety, Princess. Zara's 4 hands had moved to cover her mouth, in what Ben recognized as a Valdorian expression of shock and horror. But Mother, if this human was at Kepler Station when it was destroyed, how is he here now? Queen Kayla's ancient eyes never left Ben's face. Because humans, as I have learned, do not die easily when someone still needs saving. Ben felt the familiar weight of survivors' guilt settling on his shoulders. He had asked himself the same question countless times over the past 2 years. Why had he survived when 47 better people had died? Tell them about the escape pod, the Queen commanded gently. Ben cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. When Captain Morrison gave the order to evacuate, he made me take the emergency pod. Said someone needed to survive to tell the story. He paused, gathering himself. The pod was damaged in the explosion. Life support was failing. Navigation systems were offline. I was drifting through dead space with no way to signal for help. How long? Princess Zara asked quietly. 8 days, Ben replied. 8 days in a damaged pod that was designed to sustain 1 person for 72 hours. Queen Kayla nodded slowly. And he was not alone in that pod. Ben closed his eyes again, remembering the 2 small forms huddled against him in the cramped space. There were 2 Valdorian children, sisters. They had been injured during the evacuation and missed the last transport. I found them in a damaged corridor just before the final withdrawal. He kept them alive, the Queen said, her voice filled with quiet amazement, by giving them his own rations and oxygen supplies. For 8 days, this human slowly starved and suffocated himself to keep 2 alien children breathing. Princess Zara stood up from her platform, her violet eyes wide with disbelief. That is impossible. No being could survive 8 days of oxygen deprivation. Human physiology is more adaptable than we realized, the Queen said. Their bodies can enter a state similar to hibernation when faced with extreme stress. It slows their metabolism enough to survive on minimal resources. She looked back at Ben. But it requires a level of conscious control that most species cannot achieve. The human had to choose moment by moment to keep breathing just enough to stay alive, while ensuring the children had what they needed. Ben remembered the growing fog in his mind as oxygen levels dropped, the constant fight to stay conscious, the 2 small Valdorian girls clinging to him, trusting him to keep them safe even as his own body began to shut down. A Silthari patrol found the pod on the 8th day. Queen Kayla continued. The human was barely alive, but the children were healthy and strong. She stepped back from Ben and, to the absolute shock of everyone in the chamber, lowered herself to one knee. The gesture sent ripples of amazement through the assembled representatives. Queen Keela had ruled the Valdorian Empire for over 3 centuries. She had never bowed to anyone or anything. Her authority was absolute, her power unquestioned. "Zara," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority that had shaped galactic politics for generations. "Kneel before him." Princess Zara dropped immediately to both knees, her forearms spread wide in the traditional pose of deepest respect and submission. Her earlier arrogance had completely disappeared, replaced by something that looked like awe. "Let this be understood by all present," Queen Kayla announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "Humanity is not seeking to become our client species. They are not applying to become our subjects or servants. They are requesting the honor of standing beside us as equals in this war." She gestured toward Ben with one of her lower arms. "This human represents a species that considers retreat a foreign concept when innocent lives are at stake. They are beings who will sacrifice themselves for strangers, who will hold impossible positions against overwhelming odds, not because they believe they can win, but because someone needs time to escape." The Queen rose to her full height, and for the first time in years, something like hope flickered in her ancient eyes. "The Devourers have conquered 14 worlds because every species they faced made logical decisions about when to retreat. Every military force they encountered calculated odds and chose survival over sacrifice when the battle turned against them." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from every species present. "But the Devourers have never faced a species that considers logic secondary to loyalty. They have never encountered beings who will fight impossible battles simply because someone asked them to." Ben felt the attention of the entire chamber focused on him. But it was different now, no longer curiosity or contempt. Something closer to respect, mixed with a kind of fearful amazement. The human ambassador asked what his species could offer this alliance. Queen Kayla continued. "The answer should be obvious to anyone who has listened to this account. They offer us something we have forgotten how to be." "What is that, Mother?" Princess Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Queen Kayla smiled, an expression that transformed her scarred features into something almost beautiful. "Heroes," she said simply. Ben felt his chest tighten with emotion. "Your Majesty, I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone would have done in the same situation." "No," the Queen said firmly. "You did what a human would do, and that, Ambassador Richards, is exactly what this alliance needs." She turned to address the entire assembly. "Let the word go forth to every world in our territory. Humanity is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Defense Alliance, with all rights and privileges accorded to founding species. Their representatives will have equal voice in all military decisions. Their ships will fly under Alliance protection. Their colonies will be defended as our own." The chamber erupted in a mixture of amazement and approval. Representatives from various species began speaking among themselves in excited tones, their translators creating a babel of different languages, but Queen Keela was not finished. "Furthermore," she announced, her voice cutting through the noise, "Ambassador Richards is hereby appointed as special military advisor to the Alliance Council, with authority to coordinate joint operations between human and alien forces." Ben felt the weight of that responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Your Majesty, I'm honored by your confidence, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for such a position." "You are the most qualified being in this galaxy," the Queen replied. "You understand what it means to stand when others fall. You know how to fight battles that cannot be won. And most importantly, you can teach other species how to do the same." She stepped closer to Ben, lowering her voice so that only he could hear. "The Devourers are coming, Ambassador. Our scouts report massive movement in the outer sectors. They are preparing for a final push that will either break our alliance or be broken by it." Ben met her ancient gaze. "What do you need from humanity?" "Everything," she said simply. "Every ship, every soldier, every crazy, illogical, impossible plan your species can devise." Ben nodded slowly. "You'll have it, Your Majesty." Queen Kayla straightened to her full height and addressed the chamber one final time. "Let the Devourers come," she declared, her voice ringing with new confidence. "They have spent years learning to counter logical strategies and reasonable tactics, but they have never faced an enemy that considers retreat impossible and surrender unthinkable." She gestured toward Ben with obvious respect. "They have never faced humanity.